So in the last lecture, we started to put a little bit more pressure on Descartes' premise 5, right? Remember, his argument goes like this. To know something, I must rule out challenges to what I claim to know. If I am dreaming, I do not know X, right? So the possibility I am dreaming is a challenge to the claim to know X. Therefore, to know X, I must rule out the possibility that I am dreaming. It is impossible to rule out the possibility I'm dreaming, so I cannot know X. He uses this mundane little piece of knowledge, me sitting in the fire. Not sitting in the fire, Lord. That would definitely be a dream, right? Hopefully, unless, Anyway, I'm sitting by the fire in my comfy robe. I can't even know that because I can't know that I'm not dreaming. And look, I think Descartes' really smart here to pick something so ordinary. Because if you can't even know you're sitting by a fire writing on a piece of paper, goodness, what can you know, right? So Descartes will say, you plug anything in for these X's, you see you don't know it because you need to rule out this possibility you're dreaming, and you can't. Now, last lecture, we talked about this response. Well, let's grant Descartes that if we're in fact dreaming, we cannot know whether we're dreaming or awake, right? A lot of our dreams seem pretty realistic. A lot of our brain, from what I know, shuts down when we're dreaming. So our critical faculties are probably not as great as they are otherwise when we're dreaming, right? In that respect, a lot like being drunk or being drugged, right? But in the same way, even if we can't know when we're dreaming, whether we're dreaming or not, we can know, we might say, that we're awake when we're awake, right? Well, we talked about last time, that seems to make knowing too much a matter of luck. When you're awake and you think you know something, well, if you think you know you're awake, you really are. But when you're asleep, you think you're awake, you don't really know it, right? Well, that just seems completely a matter of luck. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. But let's challenge this premise that we can't know that we're dreaming. Is there really no way to tell that you are dreaming when you are dreaming? Is that true? Actually, it isn't, right? There are a lot of ways it seems to tell whether you're dreaming or not. A lot of people try to train themselves to do so-called lucid dreaming, right? If you know you're dreaming, when you're dreaming, you can take control of the dream in some ways, right? Some people claim to be able to do all this weird stuff in dreams when they do that. I've actually, on more than one occasion, realized I'm dreaming when I'm dreaming. I haven't been able to fly or anything. I tried to fly once, and all I could do was kind of float like you float in a pool, right? Maybe I just don't have enough imagination to fly, right? But a lot of people have trained themselves to do this lucid dreaming, and a lot of other people want to. So you can actually find web pages, because the first step to lucid dreaming is to know you're dreaming. You can actually find web pages where people will describe how you go about this. That is, how you recognize you're dreaming if you're dreaming. Right. So one way to do this is if you're dreaming and there's a clock, look at the clock. Sometimes the clock will just look wrong, people say, but even if it has a proper time on it, if you look away and look back, the time will likely randomly change. Supposedly, it might even change while you're looking at it, right? If you look at your clock and it is 2 o'clock and you look back and it's 8, or the hands are just doing something crazy, well, you're either dreaming or your clock's broken. If your clock's not broken, it's a pretty good sign you're dreaming, right? Another one, apparently, look at your hands. People will say, look at your hands and feet, right? But, if you're dreaming, if you're in class and you wonder if you're dreaming, it might be a little weird to pull your shoes off and like start gazing at your feet. Even weirder if you're on the bus, right? But your feet, your hands, you can always look at, right? Look at your hands, and if you're dreaming, they're likely to look weird in some way. I guess the biggest one these sites talk about, if you're dreaming, you often have too many or not enough fingers, which is just weird, right? So if you look and suddenly you're like, you only have 4 fingers and you had 5 before, and you don't know what happened to that other one, you're probably dreaming. You're almost certainly dreaming if you look down and you have like 7 or 8 on a hand, right? Another more common one, if you're in a room and you can get away with it, flip a light switch. If the lights don't change, they don't go on and off, a pretty good sign that you're dreaming. Finally, close your mouth, pinch your nose, and try to breathe, right? Simple physics says if you do this in the real world, you can't breathe. If you do this and you can still breathe, you know you're dreaming. Finally, perhaps more important here than any one method, is people say that they can train themselves. You use these methods and you start spotting dreams. Apparently one thing you have to do too is just to constantly, when you're awake, ask yourself, well, am I dreaming? Get in the practice of doing that. But people say once you practice, you can get really good at it. You can usually just spot when you're dreaming, right? It just seems a certain way. It's a skill you can build up. So you might say to Descartes, well, look, there are these methods to tell if you're dreaming, and they would even work pretty good for you, Descartes. Look at your hands as you're sitting by the fire, Look at, I don't know if you had a clock. I think it was a little early for you to have reliable clocks, but, pinch your nose, close your mouth, try to breathe. All kinds of stuff you, Descartes, can do to know whether you're dreaming or not, right? If you're really worried about this, just practice over time. You'll get good at just spotting it. Well, here is, I think, the Cartesian response. No matter how good you get, you won't be perfect. Look, look at my list here. Likely to change. Likely to look weird. Probably won't do anything. I don't know, how in the world you could possibly breathe with your nose pinched and your mouth closed, but the others at least. Maybe that one's the more reliable one, but all these others, it's like, well, even people who talk about these will say, well, sometimes light switches will actually work in dreams. This isn't infallible. Usually they do nothing, sometimes they work. Usually your dreaming self gets hands wrong. Not a great artist maybe, but sometimes your hands will be okay. So I think you could say none of these are perfect. And I think you could say no matter how much you practice, even people who claim to be good at this, lucid dreaming, good at spotting dreams, don't claim that 100% of the time they get it right. So I think you could say, look, Descartes could say, look, there's some possibility you are dreaming no matter how many tests you run, no matter how good you are at this, right? If you hold your nose, close your mouth, and you try to breathe, I just did it. I couldn't. I guess I know now. Look, but I know now. I was tempted to say I know now I'm not dreaming, but maybe I don't, right? Because if you can breathe when you do that, you are dreaming because that's impossible in the real world. But sometimes in a dream, maybe your dream gets it right and you can't breathe, right? So the ways might not be perfect, and even if you practice and get skilled at telling them, you're not always going to get it right. So what Descartes would say is like, well, look, you can show me that it's unlikely you're dreaming. But unlikely means that there is some possibility that you are dreaming. You don't need to show me that it's unlikely. What you need to do is to rule out the possibility, right? Ruling out the possibility is way different than simply showing it isn't likely. As long as there's some chance that you are dreaming, then you have not ruled out the possibility you need to rule out. And Descartes would say, look, and he even ups the ante here at the end. He says, well, he talks about this evil being that could deceive you, right? Modern versions, or we might be a brain in a vat or something, right? Or a computer's running an experiment on us, all right? He says, look, there could be some powerful evil being who just for the fun of it is deceiving you, and you'd never know it, right? Even if you can show that you're not dreaming, you can't show that you're not being deceived by this evil being, or that you're not in a computer simulation, right? So really, Descartes would say, I don't think you can show you're not dreaming, but even if you could, I can just raise other possibilities you definitely can't rule out. All right. So I don't think pushing back on 5 is going to get us what we want and to show that we don't have to accept Descartes' conclusions. In the next lecture, though, I don't want to push back on premise 1. Remember, premise 1, to know something I must rule out challenges to what I claim to know. I think in some form that's a good premise. I don't want to show it's wrong. I do want to suggest we need to refine it more, that it's a bit vague and we need to narrow it down. And when we narrow it down, I'm not sure that Descartes' argument still follows from it.